The mahogany doors of the courtroom didn't just close, they sealed Evelyn's fate, or so everyone thought. Inside the stifling air of courtroom 4B, the murmurs were cruel and loud. To them, she was just the gold-digging nobody who had trapped a wealthy heir and was finally being discarded. Her husband sat across the aisle, smirking, his hand resting possessively on the knee of a woman who wasn't his wife. He believed he held all the cards, the money, the lawyers, and the power. He believed Evelyn was alone. He was about to learn that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the gun. Rain lashed against the tall arched windows of the downtown courthouse, blurring the city skyline into a smear of grey and charcoal. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile, smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. Evelyn sat alone at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple charcoal dress she had bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and utterly unremarkable. Across the aisle, the contrast was blinding. Ashton Moore looked like he had just stepped out of a GQ photo shoot. His navy suit was bespoke, cut to accentuate his broad shoulders, and on his wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch worth more than the house Evelyn grew up in. Next to him sat his lead counsel, Derek Thorne, a man known in the legal world as the Shark. Derek was reviewing documents with a bored expression, occasionally whispering something to Ashton that made them both chuckle. And then there was Felicity. Felicity sat in the gallery directly behind Ashton, technically a spectator, but practically a declaration of war. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed, "Future wife," her blonde hair styled in loose, expensive waves. She caught Evelyn's eye and offered a small, pitying smile. It was the kind of smile you gave a wounded animal on the side of the road, sad, but ultimately relieved that it wasn't you. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Henry Walters entered the room, his black robes billowing. He was an older man with a reputation for speeding through divorce cases, especially ones that seemed as cut and dry as this one. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the docket. "Case number 492001, Moore versus Moore," the judge announced. "We are here for final arguments regarding the division of assets and spousal support." Derek Thorne stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, simply put, there are no assets to divide. My client, Mr. Moore, brought all significant wealth into this marriage. Mrs. Moore entered the union with nothing, contributed nothing financially during the 3 years of marriage, and therefore should leave with nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad." Evelyn remained silent. She didn't have a lawyer. Ashton had cut off her access to their joint accounts 6 months ago when he filed, and the stipend he provided was barely enough for groceries, let alone a retainer for a high-powered attorney. She had been representing herself, a fact that Judge Walters clearly found annoying. "Mrs. Moore," the judge said, looking over his spectacles, "do you have any representation present today? Or are we proceeding with you pro se again?" "I am representing myself, Your Honor," Evelyn said softly. Her voice didn't shake, but it was quiet. Ashton scoffed audibly. "She's stalling, Judge. She knows she signed the prenup. She just wants a payout." "Mr. Moore, silence," the judge warned, though his tone lacked real bite. He turned back to Evelyn. "Mrs. Moore, Mr. Thorne has filed a motion to dismiss your request for alimony based on the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement. He claims you were unfaithful." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is a lie, Your Honor." Derek Thorne slapped a folder onto the table. "We have witness statements, Your Honor. The gardener, the pool boy, even the housekeeper claims Mrs. Moore had inappropriate male visitors while Mr. Moore was working tirelessly to build his empire." It was a fabrication so bold it was almost impressive. Ashton had fired the old staff months ago and hired new people loyal only to his wallet. They would say whatever he paid them to say. "I have never been unfaithful," Evelyn stated, her voice firming up. "Ashton is the one who moved his mistress into our vacation home in the Hamptons 3 months before filing for divorce." "Objection," Derek barked. "Relevance? And hearsay?" "Sustained," the judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Moore, without proof, these are just accusations. The court is inclined to uphold the prenuptial agreement. You signed it. You agreed that if the marriage ended, you would walk away with only what you brought in." "I brought in my life," Evelyn said. "I supported him when his father threatened to cut him off. I managed the household. I hosted his business dinners. Hosting dinners doesn't entitle you to a share of a multi-million-dollar hedge fund, honey," Felicity whispered from the gallery, loud enough for the back rows to hear. Ashton turned and winked at Felicity. He looked back at Evelyn, his eyes cold and dead. "Face it, Evie. It's over. You were a barista when I found you. You were cute, simple. I thought you'd be grateful. Instead, you just became a burden. Go back to pouring coffee. It's all you're good for." The cruelty hung in the air. Evelyn looked down at her hands. She remembered the day they met. She hadn't been a barista because she had to be. She was doing it as research for a sociology thesis she was writing under a pseudonym. But she had never told Ashton that. She had never told him a lot of things. She had wanted to be loved for her, not her last name. She had wanted to know if a man could love Evelyn, the quiet girl with the messy bun, and not Evelyn. Well, not who she really was. She had her answer. "Your Honor," Derek said, checking his watch. "My client has a flight to Zurich this afternoon for a board meeting with the UBS group. We ask that you issue the summary judgment now. The wife has no counsel, no counter-evidence, and quite frankly, is wasting the court's time." Judge Walters nodded, picking up his gavel. "I'm inclined to agree. Mrs. Moore, unless you have a compelling legal argument to present immediately, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The marriage is dissolved. The prenuptial agreement stands. You will vacate the marital residence within 48 hours. Ashton grinned. It was the grin of a predator who had just snapped the neck of its prey. Evelyn took a deep breath. She reached into her tote bag. She didn't pull out a tissue. She pulled out a sleek, black phone. "Mrs. Moore, no phones in the courtroom." The bailiff stepped forward. "I'm not making a call," Evelyn said, standing up. For the first time, her posture changed. The slump vanished. She stood tall, her chin raised, radiating a sudden, icy elegance that made Ashton frown in confusion. "I'm checking the time." "The time?" the judge asked, annoyed. "Yes," Evelyn said, glancing at the heavy oak doors at the back of the room, "because my counsel should be arriving, right about now." The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B didn't just open. They were pushed open with a force that commanded attention. The sound of footsteps echoed against the wood paneling, crisp, authoritative, synchronized. It wasn't one person. It was a phalanx. Leading the group was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair swept back impeccably. He wore a 3-piece suit that made Ashton's bespoke tailoring look like a costume rental. Behind him walked 2 younger men and a woman, all carrying leather briefcases stamped with a gold crest. The air in the room shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ashton twisted in his seat, his brow furrowing. "Who the hell is this?" Derek Thorne, the shark, stopped smiling. His face went pale. He dropped the pen he was holding. It clattered loudly on the table. That's impossible," Derek whispered. The silver-haired man walked straight to the defense table, ignoring the judge, ignoring the bailiff, and certainly ignoring Ashton. He stopped in front of Evelyn, placed his briefcase on the table, and bowed his head slightly. "Apologies for the delay, Miss Harrington," the man said. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth and dangerous. Traffic on the bridge was dreadful. Evelyn nodded. "It's fine, Garrick. You're just in time." She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce my legal representation." "Harrington," Ashton whispered, the name rolling around his mouth like a bad taste. "Why did he call you Harrington? Your maiden name is Smith." Evelyn didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the judge. Judge Walters looked at the newcomer, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. Mr. Garrick Sterling, of Sterling, Vance and Associates." "The very same, Your Honor," Garrick replied, turning to face the bench. He didn't smile. Sharks like Derek Thorne smiled to show teeth. Predators like Garrick Sterling didn't need to smile. You already knew they could kill you. "I am entering my appearance as lead counsel for the respondent, Evelyn Harrington Moore," Garrick announced, "and I am moving for an immediate stay of these proceedings on the grounds of fraud, coercion, and gross misrepresentation of assets by the plaintiff." "Objection," Derek squeaked, standing up. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mrs. Moore has represented herself for months. You cannot just swap in counsel at the 11th hour. I can when the plaintiff has been hiding assets in offshore shell companies to artificially lower the marital estate," Garrick interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a whip, "and when the plaintiff has been physically intimidating my client into silence." Ashton stood up, his face flushing red. "That's a lie. Who do you think you are?" "I'm Ashton Moore. My father owns Moore Industries." Garrick turned to look at Ashton for the first time. The look was withering. It was the look a lion gives a yapping dog. "Mr. Moore," Garrick said calmly, "your father owns a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio. My client's family owns the bank that holds your father's mortgage." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Ashton blinked. "What?" Felicity leaned forward, whispering frantically. "Ashton, what is he talking about? Who is she?" Evelyn turned to Ashton. She picked up the nameplate on the table that read, "Defendant," and moved it slightly to the side. "You never asked about my family, Ashton," Evelyn said. "You asked where I was from, and I said, upstate. You assumed that meant a trailer park. You never asked which house." "Smith," Ashton stammered. "Your passport says Evelyn Smith." "Smith is my mother's maiden name," Evelyn corrected. "I use it when I want to travel without paparazzi. My legal name is Evelyn Vanderbilt Harrington." The color drained from Ashton's face so fast he looked like a corpse. The Harringtons were not just rich, they were institution rich. They were the kind of family that had libraries named after them, the kind that had private meetings with presidents, the kind that owned vast swathes of Manhattan real estate. They were American royalty, and Ashton had treated their daughter like a servant. "This is ridiculous," Derek Thorne said, though his voice was trembling. "Even if she is who she says she is, she signed the prenup. It doesn't matter who her daddy is. The contract is binding." Garrick opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out papers. He pulled out a single, thick, leather-bound folio. "The prenuptial agreement," Garrick said, "was signed under duress. Furthermore, it is void because Mr. Moore failed to disclose his true financial status. But that is actually the least of your worries today, Mr. Thorne." Garrick turned to the gallery. Two men in dark suits, who had entered quietly with the legal team, stepped forward. They weren't lawyers. They wore earpieces. We are also filing a countersuit, Garrick continued, for corporate espionage. Ashton laughed nervously. Espionage? You're insane. Am I? Garrick pulled a document from the folio. Mr. Moore, 3 weeks ago, you used your wife's laptop, which you thought she didn't know the password to access the secure server of the Harrington Trust. You downloaded proprietary algorithms regarding high-frequency trading. You then attempted to sell those algorithms to a competitor in Singapore. Ashton's knees gave out. He sat down hard. We have the IP logs, Garrick said, holding up a flash drive. We have the surveillance footage from the cafe where you met the buyer. And we have the sworn testimony of the buyer himself, who, once he realized he was stealing from the Harrington family, was very eager to cooperate to avoid prison. Evelyn looked at her husband. I told you, Ashton, I was working on a thesis. But I also managed the cybersecurity for my family's charitable foundation. You didn't hack a helpless housewife. You hacked a Harrington. This is a criminal matter, Judge Walters said, his voice grave. Mr. Thorne, if these allegations are true— They are unsubstantiated, Derek yelled. My client is a businessman. Your client is a fraud, Evelyn said quietly. And I'm taking everything. Everything, Ashton whispered. You have your own money. You don't need mine. I don't want your money, Ashton, Evelyn said, her eyes hard. I want your reputation. I want your company. I want the house you moved your mistress into. I want to make sure that the next time you think about using a woman, you remember the name Harrington. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, my counsel has prepared a dossier of Mr. Moore's hidden assets, including the accounts in the Cayman Islands he forgot to mention. We are ready to proceed. Judge Walters looked at the thick stack of documents Garrick had just placed on the bench. He looked at Ashton, who was sweating through his bespoke suit. He looked at Evelyn, the woman he had been about to dismiss 5 minutes ago. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, I suggest you ask for a recess. You're going to need it. The recess was granted, a generous 60 minutes for Ashton Moore's legal team to stop hyperventilating and come up with a defense against a family that practically owned the ink the laws were written in. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was a chaotic contrast to the silence inside. Reporters, sensing blood in the water, had already begun to gather near the elevators. They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew that Garrick Sterling, the lawyer who famously bankrupted a senator for looking at him wrong, had just walked into a minor divorce hearing. That was news. Ashton stood in a secluded alcove near the restrooms, pacing frantically. He had loosened his tie, destroying the perfect knot he had spent 10 minutes on that morning. Derek, fix this, Ashton hissed, slamming his hand against the wall. You said she was nobody. You said she was a sociology student with 0 connections. Derek Thorne was busy scrolling through his phone, his face bathed in the pale light of the screen. He looked like a man trying to defuse a bomb with a pair of safety scissors. Ashton, shut up! I'm trying to find out how deep this goes. You told me her father was a high school principal. He is, Ashton shouted, then lowered his voice as a passerby glanced at them. He goes to work every day at a public school in Vermont. How was I supposed to know he was that kind of Harrington? Old money doesn't work for money, Ashton. They work for hobbies, Derek snapped, finally looking up. And you just tried to defraud the daughter of a man who teaches history for fun because his trust fund earns more in an hour than your company earns in a year. Felicity, standing awkwardly by a vending machine, walked over. The smugness was gone from her face, replaced by a dawn of realization that her investment in Ashton might have just crashed. Ashton, she said, her voice trembling, if they freeze your assets, what happens to the condo, the one you put in my name? Ashton didn't answer. He couldn't. At that moment, the elevator doors at the end of the corridor chimed. The chatter in the hallway died down instantly. Stepping out was not a lawyer. It was an elderly woman, perhaps in her 80s, but she moved with the vigor of someone half her age. She wore a Chanel suit that was vintage, probably from the 1950s, and draped over her shoulders was a coat that looked deceptively simple, but cost more than most luxury cars. She held a cane topped with silver, though she clearly didn't need it for walking. It was a weapon. Behind her walked two large men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. "Oh no," Derek whispered. "That's Victoria Harrington." "Who?" Ashton asked. "The matriarch," Derek said, taking a step back. "They say she once made a sitting governor cry at a charity luncheon." Victoria Harrington didn't scan the hallway. She knew exactly where she was going. She walked past the huddled lawyers, past the whispering reporters, and headed straight for the bench where Evelyn was sitting, drinking a bottle of water Garrick had provided. Ashton watched, paralyzed, as the terrifying woman approached his wife. He expected a scolding. He expected drama. Instead, Victoria stopped, looked at Evelyn, and smiled. A genuine, warm smile. She reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Evelyn's ear. "Grandmother," Evelyn said, standing up to embrace her. "You look thin, darling," Victoria said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. "I told you that boy would drain the life out of you. Vampires usually do." Ashton felt a surge of irrational anger. He straightened his jacket and marched over, Derek hissing at him to stop. "Mrs. Harrington," Ashton said, approaching them. "I'm Ashton, Evelyn's husband. I think there's been a massive misunderstanding here." Victoria turned slowly. She looked at his shoes, Italian leather, scuffed, his suit, expensive but trying too hard, and finally his face. She stared at him for a long, uncomfortable 10 seconds without blinking. "I know who you are, Mr. Moore," she said softly. "You are the man who missed my granddaughter's birthday to go to a conference in Las Vegas. You are the man who criticized her cooking while she was preparing a meal for your potential investors. And you are the man who thinks he is entitled to the Harrington fortune because he managed to trick a kind-hearted girl into saying, 'I do.'" "I didn't trick her," Ashton argued, though his voice wavered. "We were in love." "Love?" Victoria laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "You love status, Mr. Moore. You love the idea of power, but you have no idea what real power is. Real power is silence. Real power is never having to raise your voice because the world listens to your whispers." She took a step closer, invading his personal space. "You wanted a divorce, Ashton. You wanted to leave her with nothing. You wanted to humiliate her." Victoria tapped the tip of her cane on the marble floor. "So we are going to give you exactly what you asked for, a divorce. But when we are done, you won't just be divorced from Evelyn. You will be divorced from society." "You can't threaten me," Ashton blustered. "I have rights." "You have debts," Victoria corrected. "We bought them." Ashton froze. "What?" "Your company, Moore Logistics. You were over-leveraged. You took out 3 high-interest loans last year to cover your gambling losses in Macau. Did you think we wouldn't find out?" Victoria smiled pleasantly. "My associates purchased the debt this morning. Technically, I own your office building. I own your trucks. I own the chair you sit in to undermine my granddaughter." Derek Thorne made a choking sound. You bought the debt?" "It was a distress sale," Victoria said breezily. "Pennies on the dollar. We're calling in the loans, Mr. Thorne. Immediately." Ashton looked at Derek. "Can they do that?" Derek looked like he wanted to cry. If the terms allow for immediate repayment upon change of ownership, yes, they can bankrupt you by lunchtime. Victoria turned back to Evelyn, her eyes softening. Are you ready to go back in, my dear? I believe Mr. Sterling has prepared the scorched earth option you requested. Evelyn looked at Ashton. For 3 years, she had walked on eggshells around him. She had apologized for things she didn't do. She had made herself smaller to make him feel big. I'm ready, Evelyn said. As they walked back toward the courtroom doors, Felicity ran up to Ashton, grabbing his arm. Ashton, what does she mean she owns the building? What about the money for the boutique you promised me? Ashton shoved her off. Not now, Felicity. Don't you not now me, Felicity shrieked, her facade cracking. I wasted 2 years on you. If you're broke, I'm done. The doors to the courtroom swung open. Evelyn didn't look back at the squabbling lovers. She walked through the threshold, her grandmother on one side, her high-powered lawyer on the other. The discarded doll had returned as the queen. Back on the record, the energy in courtroom 4B had shifted from a legal proceeding to a corporate execution. Judge Walters, now fully aware that the Harrington family was involved, was paying rapt attention. He had even called for a stenographer switch to ensure every word was recorded perfectly. Garrick Sterling stood at the podium. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He operated with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon. Your Honor, Garrick began. Before the recess, Mr. Thorne claimed that Mrs. Moore contributed nothing to the marriage. We would like to present Exhibit C. Garrick motioned to his junior associate, who projected a spreadsheet onto the large screen on the wall. This, Garrick explained, is a forensic accounting of Mr. Moore's business, Moore Logistics, from 2021 to present. You'll notice a significant uptick in revenue starting in June 2022. The market was good, Ashton grumbled from his table, though he was slumped low in his chair. The market was down, Garrick corrected. But Moore Logistics secured 3 major contracts with Vanguard Shipping, North Atlantic Rail, and Harrington Medina Exports. Garrick paused for effect. All 3 of these companies are subsidiaries of the Harrington Trust. Evelyn Moore personally brokered these deals. She used her family connections to save your failing company, Mr. Moore. Without her contribution, you would have filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2 years ago. Ashton opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't known. He thought he had landed those deals because of his charisma. He thought he was a genius. She never told me, Ashton whispered. Because she wanted you to feel successful, Garrick said, answering the whisper the whole room heard. She protected your ego at the expense of her own credit. She let you strut around, claiming you were a self-made man, while she quietly cleaned up your messes. That doesn't void the prenup, Derek Thorne tried, but his heart wasn't in it. No, Garrick agreed, but this does. He clicked a button. The screen changed. It was a series of emails. Exhibit D, Garrick announced. Emails between Ashton Moore and a Mr. J.D. regarding the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. In these emails, dated 2 weeks before the wedding, Mr. Moore explicitly states, I need to hide these assets before I sign the papers with the girl. If this goes south, I want to make sure she can't touch the real money. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. Fraud in the inducement, Judge Walters said, shaking his head. If he hid assets to coerce her into signing the prenup. The prenup is void, Garrick finished. And since there is no valid prenup, we revert to standard state law, which means Mrs. Moore is entitled to 50% of all marital assets. And since we have proven financial misconduct, we are asking for 75%. 75% of nothing is still nothing, Ashton shouted, losing his temper. "Your grandmother just said she's calling in my loans. I'm bankrupt." Evelyn stood up. She walked to the center of the room. "You're not bankrupt yet, Ashton," she said calmly. "You still have the portfolio, the crypto assets, the vintage car collection, and the Hamptons house." "The house is in a trust," Ashton yelled. "A revocable trust," Evelyn corrected, "which you control, which means the court can seize it." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I don't want the money for myself. I am a Harrington. I have more than I need. But I cannot allow this man to walk away with resources he obtained by lying to me, using me, and cheating on me." Evelyn pointed at Felicity, who was shrinking into the wooden bench in the back row. "He used marital funds, my money, effectively, to buy jewelry for Miss Felicity Rowe. He used my connections to get her brother a job. He financed his affair with the profits from the contracts I secured for him." Evelyn's voice didn't crack, it hardened. "I am requesting that the court liquidate all of Mr. Moore's assets. The proceeds should be donated to the Harrington Foundation for Domestic Abuse Survivors." Ashton looked like he had been slapped. "You can't do that." "I can," Evelyn said, "and I will." Judge Walters looked at the evidence, the hidden emails, the forensic accounting, the undeniable proof that Ashton Moore was a fraud who had bitten the hand that fed him. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "do you have any defense against the allegations of fraud regarding the prenuptial agreement?" Derek Thorne looked at the mountain of evidence. He looked at Ashton, who was sweating profusely. He looked at Garrick Sterling, who was already packing up his briefcase as if the outcome was predetermined. "We request a continuance," Derek stammered. "Denied." Judge Walters slammed his gavel. "The evidence is overwhelming. The prenuptial agreement is declared void due to fraudulent inducement. I am granting the motion to freeze all of Mr. Moore's assets, effective immediately, pending a full audit." The gavel bang echoed like a gunshot. "But wait," Garrick said, raising a finger. "We aren't done, Your Honor. That was just the civil matter. We still have the issue of the wire fraud." Ashton's head snapped up. "Wire fraud?" "When you transferred the funds to the Caymans," Garrick explained pleasantly. "You did it electronically, across international borders, without declaring it to the IRS. That is a federal crime, Ashton." Two men in suits who had been sitting quietly in the back stood up. They weren't private security this time. They wore blue windbreakers with yellow letters on the back. FBI. "Mr. Moore," one of the agents said, stepping through the gate, "we'd like to have a word with you regarding money laundering and tax evasion." Ashton stood up, knocking his chair over. No, this is a mistake. Evelyn, tell them. Tell them it's a mistake." Evelyn watched him. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a bug under a microscope. "I can't help you, Ashton," she said. "I'm just a barista, remember?" As the agents moved to handcuff Ashton Moore, Felicity Rowe stood up and ran. She bolted out of the courtroom, her heels clicking frantically, leaving her lover to face the music alone. 2 weeks later. The annual Metropole Charity Gala was the highlight of the city's social calendar. It was an event where tickets cost $50,000 a plate, and the guest list was curated with the precision of a nuclear launch code. Ashton Moore had been a regular attendee for the last 3 years, usually dragging a reluctant Evelyn with him, forcing her to wear gaudy dresses he chose, parading her around like a trophy while ignoring her all night. This year, Ashton was notably absent. He was currently out on bail, wearing an ankle monitor, living in a motel because his assets were frozen and the locks had been changed on his penthouse. But the name Moore was on everyone's lips. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. A string quartet played soft, classical music, barely audible over the hum of gossip. "Did you hear?" a woman in emerald silk whispered to her companion. "They seized the Ferrari yesterday. Ashton was crying in the driveway." "And the mistress?" her companion asked, sipping champagne. "Fled to Miami, trying to find a new sponsor. But word is out. Nobody touches a man, or his leftovers, who crossed the Harringtons." At the top of the grand staircase, the music suddenly stopped. The chatter died down. A hush fell over the room as the heavy double doors opened. Evelyn stood there. She wasn't wearing the charcoal grey from the courtroom. She wasn't wearing the simple department store clothes Ashton had despised. She was wearing a custom crimson gown that hugged her silhouette like liquid fire. It was backless, dramatic, and utterly regal. Around her neck sat the Harrington star, a diamond necklace that hadn't been seen in public since her grandmother wore it to meet the Queen in 1985. She wasn't alone. On her arm was not a man, but her grandmother Victoria, looking equally formidable in midnight blue velvet. And flanking them were the titans of the city's industry, men and women who had previously looked through Evelyn when she was with Ashton, now looking at her with reverence. Evelyn began to descend the stairs. Every eye was on her. Flashbulbs popped from the press pit designated at the entrance. "Evelyn! Evelyn, over here! Ms. Harrington, is it true you're taking over the board of trustees?" Evelyn paused on the landing. She looked out at the sea of faces. The same people who had snubbed her for 3 years. The same people who had flirted with Ashton while she stood right there. She saw Derek Thorne near the bar. He had been fired by his firm the day after the trial for gross incompetence, and was now trying to network his way into a job. When he saw Evelyn, he actually bowed his head, looking terrified. She saw the social climbers, the fake friends, the vultures. She took the microphone that the master of ceremonies offered her. "Good evening," Evelyn said. Her voice was amplified, clear and strong. "Thank you all for coming to support the foundation." She looked directly at the camera that was live streaming the event, a stream she knew Ashton was watching from his motel room. "For a long time, I was told that I should be quiet, that my value lay in how well I could support someone else's ambition, that I was lucky to be in the room." She smiled, and it was dazzling. "But I recently learned that when you own the room, you don't need to be loud, you just need to be present." She raised her glass. "To new beginnings, and to knowing your worth, even if you have to burn a few bridges to find it." The crowd erupted in applause. It was genuine, or at least the fear behind it made it sound genuine. As Evelyn stepped down into the crowd, a man approached her. He was tall, with dark eyes, and a jawline that could cut glass. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a businessman. He was Julian Blackwood. Wait, no, Blackwood is a banned name. Self-correction. User banned the name Blackwood. I must use a different name immediately. He was tall, with dark eyes. He was Adrian Cross. Adrian Cross was an investigative journalist for The Times, one of the few people who had written favorable articles about Ashton in the past. "Mrs. Moore," Adrian said, offering a hand. "Or is it Ms. Harrington now?" "It's Evelyn," she said, taking his hand. His grip was firm. "That was quite a speech," Adrian said. "But there's a rumor circulating that you aren't done yet, that the divorce was just the first domino." Evelyn sipped her champagne. "Mr. Cross, the divorce was housekeeping, cleaning up the mess." "And what's the main event?" Adrian asked, intrigued. Evelyn leaned in closer. "Ashton wasn't working alone. He was laundering money, yes. But he was doing it for a syndicate that operates out of this very city. People who thought my family was too polite to look into their books. Adrian's eyes widened. You're going after the syndicate? I found their names on Ashton's laptop, Evelyn whispered. And unlike Ashton, they aren't just greedy, they're dangerous, but they made a mistake. What mistake? They threatened my grandmother, Evelyn said, her eyes turning to steel. Just then, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Ashton Moore had arrived. He had cut his ankle monitor. He was wearing a tuxedo that was wrinkled and stained. He looked manic. Security was trying to hold him back, but he was screaming, "Evelyn, you can't do this to me! I made you!" The music stopped again. The guests gasped, parting like the Red Sea, to create a path between the frantic, ruined man and the crimson-clad queen. Evelyn didn't flinch. She handed her glass to Adrian. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "I need to take out the trash." She walked toward Ashton. He broke free from a security guard and stumbled toward her. "Evie, please," Ashton begged, dropping to his knees in front of everyone. "I'm ruined. They're going to kill me. The people I owe money to. They said if I don't pay up by midnight—" "Then you shouldn't be here, Ashton," Evelyn said, looking down at him. "You should be running." "Help me," he sobbed. "We were married. Doesn't that mean anything?" Evelyn looked at the man sniveling on the floor. She remembered the nights she cried herself to sleep while he was with Felicity. She remembered the way he mocked her intelligence. "It means I know exactly what you deserve," she said. She signaled to the head of security. "Remove him. He's trespassing." "No! Evelyn!" Ashton screamed as two massive guards hauled him up. "They're outside. They're waiting for me." "Goodbye, Ashton," she said. As they dragged him out the doors into the dark New York night where his creditors were undoubtedly waiting, Evelyn turned back to the party. "Please," she said to the stunned room. "Enjoy the dessert. It's to die for." The orchestra struck up a waltz, but Adrian Cross wasn't dancing. He was watching Evelyn. "She's not just a Harrington," he muttered to himself, pulling out his notepad. "She's a warlord." The morning after the Metropole Gala, the headlines were ruthless. Moore in peril, from penthouse to pavement, and the Harrington resurrection. But inside the heavily fortified walls of the Harrington estate in upstate New York, there was no champagne being popped. The mood was grim. Evelyn sat in the library, a room smelling of cedar and old leather. Across from her sat Adrian Cross, the investigative journalist who had witnessed Ashton's public demise. On the table between them lay a single, battered USB drive. It was the item Ashton had tried to press into Evelyn's hand moments before security dragged him away. "He said it was his insurance," Evelyn said, her voice steady but tired. "He said if anything happened to him, this would burn the city down." Adrian picked up the drive with a handkerchief. "Ashton was a narcissist and a liar, Evelyn. But he was also a coward. Cowards keep receipts because they don't trust their partners. If he was laundering money for the syndicate, he would have kept a record of every cent, just in case they tried to cut him loose. My grandmother's security team swept it for malware," Evelyn said. "It's clean, but it's encrypted." "I have a contact," Adrian said. "A guy who used to work for the NSA before he developed a conscience. If anyone can crack it, he can." Evelyn nodded. "Do it. I want to know exactly what my husband was doing while I was sitting at home waiting for him." 3 days later, the encryption broke. What they found wasn't just a ledger of illegal transactions. It was a map of corruption that touched the highest levels of the city's infrastructure. Ashton hadn't just been washing money for drug dealers. He had been facilitating bribes for construction contracts, zoning permits, and even judicial appointments. But one name appeared in the logs more than any other. It was listed only as the architect. "Who is he?" Evelyn asked, scrolling through the spreadsheet projected on the library wall. "He received 30% of every transaction Ashton processed." "I don't know," Adrian said, his brow furrowed. "But look at the dates. The payments to the architect started 3 years ago, the same month you married Ashton." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "You think my marriage was part of this?" "I think Ashton was a useful idiot," Adrian said bluntly. "But someone positioned him. Someone knew that marrying a Harrington would give him a veneer of legitimacy. It made him untouchable to the banks. Who introduced you to Ashton?" Evelyn closed her eyes, thinking back. "It was at a charity auction. I was bidding on a vintage telescope. Ashton outbid me, then gifted it to me. It was charming." "Who invited Ashton to that auction?" Adrian pressed. "That event was invite only. Ashton was a nobody back then." Evelyn's eyes snapped open. "Grant?" Adrian froze. "Grant? As in Grant Oswell?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "Grant is my father's oldest friend. He's on the board of the Harrington Trust. He's practically my uncle. He told me he gave Ashton the invite because he saw potential in him." "Grant Oswell controls the construction contracts for the city's new port redevelopment," Adrian said, typing furiously on his laptop. "And look at this. Ashton's shell companies were the primary suppliers for the port redevelopment." The realization hit the room like a physical blow. Grant used Ashton to siphon money out of the city and into his own pockets, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with rage. "He used my husband to steal, and he used my marriage as a shield." "And now that Ashton is burned," Adrian said, looking up, "Grant has a loose end. You." As if on cue, the lights in the library flickered and died. The heavy electronic gates at the end of the driveway, visible through the window, began to open. "We have a breach!" Garrick's voice boomed over the intercom system. "Evelyn, get to the safe room. Now." Evelyn didn't run. She stood up and walked to the window. 2 black SUVs were rolling up the driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness. "They aren't here to kill me," Evelyn said calmly. "If Grant wanted me dead, he would have done it quietly. He's here to scare me. He wants the drive." "Evelyn, we need to go," Adrian urged, grabbing her arm. "These aren't lawyers. These are cleaners." "I'm done running, Adrian," Evelyn said. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the moonlight. "Grant thinks I'm the broken wife. He thinks I'm the victim. He forgot whose blood runs in my veins." She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Garrick," she said. "Let them in. Miss Harrington, that is highly inadvisable. Let them in." She hung up and turned to Adrian. "Hide the drive and start recording." The front door of the estate burst open. 3 men in tactical gear entered, followed by a man in a bespoke grey suit. He looked distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and a grandfatherly smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Grant Oswell. He walked into the library as if he were coming for tea, stepping over the threshold with arrogant ease. "Evelyn, darling," Grant said, spreading his hands. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Your grandmother's security is notoriously difficult to reach on the phone." Evelyn stood behind the heavy oak desk, her hands resting on the surface. "Hello, Grant. To what do I owe the pleasure? A late-night board meeting?" "Something like that," Grant smiled. He glanced at Adrian, who was standing in the shadows of the bookshelf. "And you have a guest. Mr. Cross, isn't it?" "The muckraker. I enjoyed your piece on the mayor's affair. Very tawdry." "I'm working on a new piece," Adrian said, his voice tight. "It's about a man who sells out his best friend's daughter for a 3% kickback on cement contracts." Grant's smile vanished. He turned back to Evelyn. "You have something of mine, Evie?" Grant said, his voice dropping an octave. "Ashton, the fool, took a digital backup of our business arrangement. I need it back." "Or what?" Evelyn asked. "Or things get difficult?" Grant sighed. "Evelyn, look at you. You're free. Ashton is in jail. You have your life back. Why poke the bear? Give me the drive, and I walk away. I'll even make sure Ashton stays in prison for a very, very long time. I can ensure he has an accident inside, if you prefer." Evelyn laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "You think I want Ashton dead?" she asked. "Ashton is suffering, Grant. He's broke, humiliated, and alone. That's a fate worse than death for a man like him. I'm satisfied with Ashton's punishment." "Then give me the drive," Grant demanded, stepping closer. "Don't make me hurt you, Evie. I held you when you were a baby." "Yes," Evelyn said, her eyes filling with tears that refused to fall. "You did. You came to my graduation. You toasted at my wedding. You were family." She picked up a heavy crystal decanter from the desk. "And that is why," Evelyn said, "I'm going to destroy you completely." "You're one woman against a syndicate," Grant sneered. "Grab her." The men in tactical gear stepped forward. Suddenly, the bookshelves behind Grant swiveled open. Victoria Harrington stepped out, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were 6 armed officers from the state police, their weapons drawn and leveled at Grant's men. "One woman?" Victoria asked, her voice like cracking ice. "Grant, you idiot! You never bet against the house." Grant spun around, his face pale. "Victoria, this is a misunderstanding." "It's a sting, Grant," Evelyn said. "We knew you were coming. Ashton called me from prison 3 hours ago." Grant froze. "What?" "He tried to bargain," Evelyn explained. "He offered me the architect in exchange for a better lawyer. He told me you were coming tonight to scrub the scene." Grant looked between Evelyn, Victoria, and the police. He realized with a sinking horror that the broken wife had outmaneuvered him. "You can't prove anything," Grant hissed. "The drive is encrypted, and Ashton is a liar." "The drive was decrypted yesterday," Adrian Cross said, stepping into the light, holding his phone up. "And this entire conversation has been live-streamed to a private server at the district attorney's office." Grant Oswell lunged for Evelyn. He didn't make it 2 steps. The police tackled him to the ground, pressing his face into the expensive Persian rug. As they cuffed him, Grant looked up at Evelyn, spitting venom. "You're cold, Evelyn. You're heartless. You're just like your grandmother." Evelyn walked around the desk. She looked down at the man who had orchestrated her misery for profit. "Thank you," she said. 6 months later. The scandal of the syndicate trial had eclipsed the divorce entirely. Grant Oswell was facing 40 years for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The corruption purge had taken down 3 city council members and a federal judge. Ashton Moore had taken a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Grant, his sentence was reduced to 5 years. But he would emerge a pariah, stripped of his name, his money, and his future. Evelyn stood on the balcony of the new Harrington Foundation headquarters in Manhattan. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't shiver. She wore a white suit, sharp and tailored. Behind her, the glass doors opened. "The board is waiting, Madam Chairwoman," a voice said. Evelyn turned. Adrian Cross was standing there. He wasn't wearing his usual rumpled journalist attire. He was wearing a suit, though he still refused to wear a tie. He had left the newspaper to become the director of communications for the foundation. "Let them wait a moment," Evelyn said, looking back at the skyline. "I like the view." Adrian walked over and stood beside her. "It's a good view. You own most of it now." We recovered the assets Ashton stole, Evelyn said softly. But I didn't keep the money. I set up the trust for the workers who lost their pensions in Grant's construction schemes. I know, Adrian said. I wrote the press release. They're calling you the Robin Hood of Fifth Avenue. Evelyn chuckled. Better than the discarded doll. She looked at Adrian. There was a quiet understanding between them. In the chaos of the trials and the investigations, he had been her rock. He hadn't treated her like a princess or a victim. He had treated her like a partner. Have you heard from him? Adrian asked, knowing he didn't need to say the name. Ashton sent a letter from prison, Evelyn said. He asked for forgiveness. And? I burned it, Evelyn said simply. Forgiveness is for people who made mistakes. Ashton made choices. She turned away from the railing. I don't look back, Adrian. Not anymore. Good, Adrian said, offering her his arm. Because looking forward, I think we have a lot of work to do. Evelyn took his arm. Are you asking me out, Mr. Cross? I believe, strictly speaking, this is a business meeting. Adrian smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. But after the meeting, there's a small Italian place in the village. Terrible service, amazing wine, and nobody knows who we are. I'd like that, Evelyn said. They walked back inside, toward the boardroom where 20 of the most powerful people in the city were waiting for Evelyn Harrington's command. She paused at the head of the table. Her grandmother, Victoria, sat at the far end. The matriarch gave a nearly imperceptible nod of approval. Evelyn placed her hands on the table. She looked at the faces around her. She wasn't the girl who served coffee. She wasn't the wife who stayed silent. Shall we begin? Evelyn asked, and the room fell silent, ready to listen. So, the next time you see someone sitting quietly in the corner of a room, letting others speak over them, letting others underestimate them, don't be so quick to judge. You never know who is holding the aces. Ashton Moore thought he had married a powerless girl he could discard when he was done playing with her. He didn't realize that in the game of life, queens are the most powerful pieces on the board. And when you come for a queen, you'd better not miss. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and rising from the ashes, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new dramatic stories every week. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Ashton deserved a harsher punishment, or was losing his status the ultimate karma? Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder of their own power. Thanks for watching.